Wow, thank you all. So it's my great privilege to get to introduce our speaker for you today. Dr. Fred Lybrand is a graduate of Dallas Theological Seminary. He's very used to being part of the Free Church movement. He's no stranger to the Free Church movement. He's pastored for 25 years, both in Midland and in San Antonio. He's authored 8 books, and he's here with his wife, Jody, and some of the kiddos. I'll let him introduce all the family that's with him. He's currently involved in writing. He's involved in developing educational equipping materials for college students, also organizational process redesign for churches and for nonprofits and for businesses. So anyway, we're delighted to have Fred here to speak with us today. Fred, I invite you to come to the pulpit and share what God has put on your heart. Let's make him feel very welcome.
So I listened to all that, and I'm reminded that I really just have ADHD, and I don't take medicine for it. Actually, I was re-diagnosed this year with ADOS. That's attention deficit. Oh, squirrel! So, as they say in my family, a little of me goes a long way. I grew up in Alabama. And made it to Texas as quick as I could, which was a bit of a lateral move, I found out. Dad was in the legislature, and as I was preparing this talk this week and trying to think through what message would I bring, what I was thinking is this might be the only time I ever speak to these people. What would I want to say? And I can't go from Genesis to Revelation in one sermon, so I had to narrow it down. And in narrowing it, I had a good idea, and then I had another idea, and then the circumstances in our world kept crowding in on me, and I realized, oh, this is like the Sunday before that day, right? And I was thinking about it, and I remember Dad, he liked to share a variety of stories, and one of his favorite ones was perfect for this group. Said this politician, they were having a particularly raucous battle, intense, painful, in the press, in the media, everywhere. And finally, one of them came out and said, all right, I want to put an end to this conflict. I'll make a deal. If my opponent will quit lying about me, I'll quit telling the truth about him. How many of you feel like, see, I can't even do that. They'll take a picture and I'll be, oh, see, he's connected to that group in Germany, so I'm going to do it like this. How many of you feel like, that's true. I'm not making this up. You got to walk around, I'm an optimist. I'm a paranoid optimist. That's me, okay? So, how many of you feel like the world's a little bit out of control right now? Can I see your hands? A few of you. How many of you feel like you've tried to get control over your world and just really try to make it work? Have you ever tried that? And how'd that work out? Have you noticed it didn't work that well? How many of you just don't want to raise your hand? Let me just see. Yeah, okay. I'm understanding the group here. So there's the challenge, it seems to me. And I want to say, first of all, this is genuine, heartfelt, absolute appreciation for you being here. I don't mind speaking alone. I often do. That's not the problem. But, you're showing up in an age where church isn't quite as hip as it was. Everybody's in their own stuff. People don't grasp community. You had to go to the trouble of making sure your clock was right. You had to get dressed. You had to get over that conflict, driving over, by the time you got in the parking lot so you could get along by the time you walked in and smiled. All that you overcome just to show up is an amazing thing. But the fact that you care, sitting here in Austin, Texas, when I lived in Midland, we referred to the university as the University of Sodom and Gomorrah. I didn't know why, because I was an Alabama fan. It didn't matter to me. And as a result, we had 4 of our sons go to the University of Texas. And the Last one's here. He's in his sophomore year. The daughter went to Abilene Christian, then worked for the St. Louis Cardinals and moved to Houston last week and interviewed with the Astros. So who knows what will happen there. That you show up and you care about church and your faith and you're looking for answers and you're propagating them and you're sharing them and you're connecting together is a testimony to what actually matters in this world. And I'm grateful that we can take a moment together and look at the Word of God and see if we can be better by it. My name actually is Fred Ray Lybrand. In Alabama, I think it's in the code that you must have a middle name of Ray somewhere in your immediate family. So I'm the only Fred Ray Lybrand on the internet that I'm aware of, so I use that on occasionally. And I want to talk to you this morning about peace. I know it said in a bulletin I saw we're going to Corinth, but we're not going to Corinth. We're going to talk about peace. And when I titled this, what I wanted to say in it was kind of to make a contract with you. That if you'll endure with me, I'm going to share with you what I think is true for this title, and it's called Total Peace in an Out-of-Control World. Total peace in an out-of-control world. Would you like that? Well, first, if you don't mind, you don't know me, so I'd like to share with you a little while I want to talk about peace. Is that okay? So here it is with peace. I grew up in, as I said, Alabama, so already I have issues, right? But I'm kin to everyone, so we can all work on it as family. So I grew up in this home, and Dad was in the legislature. He was an attorney. He was in the House and the Senate for two term each. He wrote the first ethics code for the state of Alabama. He was the outstanding orator one year by the Birmingham News, kind of like a Dallas paper, someone giving an award. And it was highly competitive. The standards, I was a PK kid, a politician's kid. And the standards of how you had to act and behave and what you did were high. And then Mom was outstanding young woman of America. She ran cancer drives, leukemia drives. When she cooked, she laid all the ingredients out in the order they would occur. She never, a time in my life, ever, not ever, went to bed without the kitchen totally cleaned up. Never. I mean, you talk about issues, but it was competitive, high standard. And in the same moment, incredibly dysfunctional. Alcoholics, as far as the eye can see, in every direction. Mom and Dad divorced. Dad actually wrote the first no-fault divorce law for the state of Alabama that he later used. So we're also efficient. So, and listen, don't miss, look, I love my parents. You're going to see why all this was incredible for me. But this dysfunction underneath, Dad dies of a cirrhotic liver, alcoholic mother, aunt, as far as we know, a nurse, took drugs, mixed in her body, died. Grandparents, 2 died at the state mental institution, as far as I know, from DTs. Another alcoholic grandparent here. Dad's brother, a speech writer for Wernher von Braun, the rocket scientist, killed a mother of 5 in a head-on collision, 0.2 some odd drunk. I mean, you take the Mayo Clinic test, just the genetics. I've already passed, I've already got a problem just because I'm kin to. But that's not the issue. The issue is there's all this dysfunction going on and all this high competition going on, and that is a recipe for a lack of peace. Never know where you stand, never know what's going on. Not knowing how relationships work or don't know where up is, don't know where down is. Always obsessed with who's going to vote for you, who's going to vote against you. And in God's kindness, that drove me straightway to the Lord of Glory in college. And I was able to be introduced to everything you need for life and godliness right there. And in God's kindness, I could also read. As we look at this issue of peace, what I'm going to share with you today is a little different than what you're used to, because what you're used to is you're used to getting tactics, and they're all biblical. So the Bible, a sermon normally would tell you, here's a tactic to use. Go do this step, do this thing, and you'll get this result, right? Those tactics are incredibly valuable, but if you have the wrong context for them, the wrong frame, those tactics don't work so well. You can imagine something like, people do this. They believe that people believe Jesus was a myth. He didn't really live. So if they read anything that Jesus said or discussed and they think he's just made up, they read it in a different way. It doesn't have the same authority and clarity that it does when you understand he was a living, on earth man, right? So what I want to share with you today is a context, a perspective, a paradigm, that if you get this straight, then instead of needing just to have the tactics that are great to use to get peace, you can start integrating peace into every day and every moment. If you get what I'm going to share today, you're going to be able to have peace all the time. Does that sound good? We'll see if the Word of God can pull this off for us. So I want to explain the concept of paradigm first. And a paradigm shift is when you have a shift in your understanding. And this is where the most profound lasting changes occurs for human beings. That they suddenly one day go, could have had a V8, but it's something bigger than that. They have a change. And the glaring example that I enjoy the most growing up was with Tripp. And so Tripp is the oldest brother. And he was about 3 at the time. And then there's Laura, and she's a couple years back somewhere. So this is close to accurate. And they're little kids, and they're in Alabama visiting with grandmom. And back in those days, they passed a law. Well, actually, a few years before that, we got cars in Alabama. And then after you get cars, they have a rule about buckling babies in. Do you remember that? So I remember the first time we got Tripp was born, he in the car seat, get him in the car. We drive home. I drive so carefully the whole way. We get home, get out. I never buckled the seat into the actual car. He's just sitting up there riding high and free, And that's how we did in Alabama. A seatbelt, for us, we like to sit in the back and look at the stars at night, laying up on a back shelf. And a break in Alabama was, if you're in the front seat, it was this, mother doing this. That's how it worked. Well, grandmother wanted to obey the new law, and so we had that context. Well, that context, they go to Chuck E. Cheese. Had no Chuck E. Cheese's in Midland. This is a big deal. They've got Chuck E. Cheese. And so the kids go in with grandmom. They eat the pizza. They play the games. They get scared of the rat. They do the whole thing, right? And they get out, and they go to the car, and she fiddles and works and gets Laura buckled in. And then Tripp says to her, I need to go to the bathroom. Did I mention we were in Alabama? Okay, good. This comes in handy. So she tells us she's looking at Tripp, and she doesn't want to go back through explaining we don't want to buy things, don't want to buy tickets, we don't want to see the rat. We just, so she does what you do. She drove around back, got him out, a lot of trees there. Lots of trees. Organized him properly for the event, and he looked at her and said, "What are we doing?" She said, "You're going to go to the bathroom." She said his little eyes got this big. He went, "Like an animal!" And the boy had a paradigm shift. And then, for a month, we couldn't get him to go inside. I'm made to mark my territory, my domain or something. Yeah, so he had this shift in his understanding, something he'd never thought about. What I'm hoping this morning we do is figure out maybe something you have thought about and you taste it again for the very first time, like cornflakes, or maybe this is fresh. If you would, take out a 3x5, imaginary 3x5. You all can do this, okay? Imaginary 3x5. Your imaginary G2 pen, or whatever your preference is, or number 2 lead pencil. And I want you to write on this imaginary card one thing that is stealing your peace right now. One thing that is stealing your peace. And write that down. Okay, now you can put that up because we're going to use it later. What I want to do this morning is I want to look at a truth. And I want it to be a paradigm shift. I want it to be a perspective, a way to think that is the means to which you're going to be able to grasp peace. Look, I understand how we do peace in church. I understand what we teach. If I wanted to really teach the sermon, I'd teach Philippians 4. And I'd show you Philippians 4 is really cool. It starts with rejoicing. It has rejoicing down here. This is called an inclusio. So it's like a rejoicing sandwich. And inside of this cool rejoicing sandwich, it breaks down into 3 cool parts. And the first part is about prayer. You cast your anxieties on the Lord, right? You know that, 6 and 7 right in there. And you pray. The next section, verse 8, we're into think on these things, pure, lovely, worthy of praise. And then the next section is act. So we got to pray, think, act, set up. Such a great sermon set up. And the action, the things you've seen and heard, these do, and the God of peace will be with you. So we've got peace in here, inside of a rejoicing sandwich, set up for that amazing verse that says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. It's about having peace and rejoicing, not about pitching a good baseball game, though that seems to help there sometimes in history. But that's not what we're doing. That's a tactic. And God wrote the tactic. It's a good thing. Don't hear anything else that I said except it's good. But I'm wanting you to understand something more profound and powerful that fits the whole topic together. If I had a verse that did it, it'd be Isaiah 26 and verse 3. It says, you keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you, because he trusts in you. You keep in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you. But I'm going to tell you, it's not just thinking about God that's the key. It's actually thinking the way God thinks that's the key. Sometimes we pull up short. I know we're supposed to gaze on the Lord. I know we behold him and worship him. But part of the nature of the conversation is for us to have God's viewpoint of what's going on. And when we lose that, we lose kind of everything. I don't know if you've noticed that before, but that's exactly what happens. So what I'd like to do is look at an Old Testament passage and a New Testament passage and see if we can make sense of this. The Old Testament, if you'd like to turn there into your Bibles, is in Genesis. We're going to look at Genesis 50. But the story begins back in Genesis 37. So it's the story of Joseph. Now, Joseph is an amazing character, a little irritating at times, but, all these guys that just, don't y'all ever sin? Like Daniel and Joseph and Jesus are like, you're so hard to preach because, is there nothing human here? I need something I can relate to. Well, Joseph was born late in his dad Jacob's life. He is this last baby, and the way parents tend to do is they tend to favor that baby. They just move down the ladder. It describes it that way. Well, Joseph had another problem besides dad loving him, gave him a special coat, multicolored. He was just favored. And I don't know if you know this, but if you favor a child, it can irritate the other children. Have you noticed this? Yeah, and in fact, Jody and I finally kind of figured out that we started telling the kids pretty young, said, I'd say, I love you, but I love your mother more than you. They'd look at me like, I don't really care, I just want a toy. But I pretended they were looking like, really? I'm hurt, Father. I said, no, let's say I love you all the same, but I love her more. And so we did things like we'd sit by each other at the dinner table, like us against them, because there are 5 kids. And like the bedroom, you're not allowed in our bedroom. Not a family bed, not a family room. This is our room. This is, secretly we called it the eye of the hurricane. That was the place we could go. And all we wanted them to see was come out occasionally smiling and them thinking, okay, I'm going to get me one of them spouses and one of them bedrooms because that seems to work. That's all we wanted for you to go. And they did, and we're grateful. Joseph didn't have that context. He was favored. And then he has this dream and this ability to interpret dreams. And he came up with this understanding. And he told his brothers, totally matter of fact, probably just said, hey, I had this dream and the way it worked out, I'm just going to be a lot greater than y'all are on the planet. And y'all are going to be like down here and I'm going to be up here. It's just a thing. God said it. Now, I know siblings, they heard it like, oh, I am all, boom, I am the guy, and y'all are, pfft. Well, this irritates people sometimes. And so they opted in time to, kill him. Then there was a debate, threw him in a pit instead. What are we going to do? They're eating sandwiches or whatever they had. And they're hear a caravan coming by on the way to Egypt, and they think, hey, we could make money off this. So they sold Joseph to Egypt, took the coat, tore it a little bit, threw a little goat's blood, handed it to Dad, and let him be miserable for, a few decades. Did I mention that I grew up in a dysfunctional family? This is that game. So the story is pretty simple because it keeps saying all the way through, and God was with Joseph, and God was with Joseph, and God was with Joseph. And he winds up magistrates and winds up in Pharaoh's world, and he's there in Potiphar's house. He's kind of helped run it. He's awesome, amazing. Wife starts wanting romantic interaction. He says, no, it's wicked. Keep going through that. She sets him up, blames him, thrown in prison, gets to know another couple of guys. They have dreams. He interprets the dreams. One goes to the gallows. One gets raised back into Pharaoh's world. Still forgets Joseph. Later, Pharaoh has a dream. No one figures it out. This guy said, I knew I got in prison. They call him. He interprets it. He gets elevated to kind of be the prime minister to oversee what's about to happen. 7 years of feast and 7 years of famine. And in that context, all the time the famine's hitting so hard, the brothers have to come down to beg for grain from Pharaoh. And they reconnect as a family. Joseph has them all come down there. They're all restored. He feeds them and takes care of them until the day Dad dies. And we pick up in Genesis chapter 50, verse 15. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, it may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him. Genesis 50 and verse 16. So they sent a message to Joseph saying, your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of God, of your father. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, behold, we're your servants. But Joseph said to them, do not fear, for am I in the place of God? Question. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So Joseph had God's viewpoint. Joseph understood that from God's vantage point, God's the one that rights the wrongs. And what God did, you did something you meant for evil, but behind the scenes and over it all, God actually meant it for good. And it worked out to be the deliverance of zillions of people. That's the first hint at this paradigm shift. What if what's going on in your life was taken on that way? You have things going on that you take are meant for evil. I mean, turn on the TV, right? It's all evil. Even the good stuff is awful. I'm talking about the news. I'm not talking about all the shows. They're all clean and moral. Move from here to Romans chapter 8. This is a famous passage. One of the problems with famous and familiar passages is we often overlook them. Romans 8 and verse 28. It's in a context of spiritual life, a context of clarifying the nature of our struggle with sin, all the way back in 4 and 5, our forgiveness, then the nature of the struggle, the answer to the struggle, and then this future destiny as heirs with Christ, and God's going to redeem all the creation. And in this context, he's moving this crescendo in this point, and he tells us so many years later these words, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. So we've got in here things like his purpose and the word good and all, right? And knowing and work together. We're going to look at all those very quickly. But before I do that, this talk is about peace. This message is about peace. And for you to understand peace, I need you to understand why you're not peaceful. The Bible defines peace for us very nicely because the Bible knows that part of the way you define things is with contrasts. Antonyms, synonyms, all those things, similar and different. So what does the Bible say about peace? The Bible says in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse 8, there's a time for this, time for that, and there's a time for peace and a time for war. War is not peace. Conflict is not peace. When you have a battle of ideas, not peace. When you have a battle of worldviews, not peace. When you have battle in relationships, not peace. We had a lake cabin growing up in Alabama, and my favorite times there were early in the morning and right before it turned dark, because it would be so peaceful. You've seen this with the lake. And what happens? The wind stops. The noise goes away. It's quiet. There's no turbulence, nothing disturbed. There's no war going on. There's no battle. There's no conflict. There's no any of that. What causes the lack of peace in your life is this issue of control. When things are under control, it's peaceful. When things are out of control, it's not. That's all there is to it. If you don't have peace, there's something out of control that you want to control. That's the story. If you're prone to doze off during a sermon, do it now. You got it, okay? I'll wake you up at the end, have a really good story, and we'll call it a day. It is about control. And what Romans 8 tells us is something stark raving crazy. Only God would figure stuff like this out. Watch. We know that those who love God, all things work together for good. It starts out with this word know. This word know is in the perfect tense. What that means is it happened and it has a result that just continues on, right? So it's not that we knew or that we knew it for a moment, but we know and we keep knowing and we keep knowing and we keep knowing and we keep knowing. We keep knowing what? What he's about to tell us. We know and can keep knowing that all things, the word in Greek, all, that word, pantos, these words, they mean all. I'll slow down so you can write that. I mean, seriously, it's even like I was going through this, and the pigs, the demons are throwing the pigs, right, in Gadara. All the pigs had demons, apparently. All. It wasn't just like a little rabble-rousing group and the rest of the pigs are stupid and followed, the story. All things, whatever you think about it. What's on your imaginary card right there? That one too. And something with finances, and something with relationships, and something with what happened growing up, and what's something that's just about to happen in job and work and elections and. There is nothing left out of this. You have a thing, area called all things, and God draws a circle around that. And he's outside of that, all things. And this is this God who, it says, works them to good. The word good is clear enough because it's God's good. And in context, we know it's specifically and especially Romans 8:29, the good of being like Christ. We know that's the direction. Ultimately, you're going to be like Christ. You're on a crash course with Christ-likeness. Some of us have a long way to go. I'm very aware of that, but that's what God's up to. All things work together for good. This word work together, it's soon ergos or ergon or different forms of it, but we use a word like synergy. So synergy, where things work together, like 1 + 1 = 3, something bigger happens than just those combined elements. It's a system, kind of a multiplication thing. I know you physicists would say that's not how it works, but I'm preaching here. Don't stop me. In the Bible, it would be this same thought, that it's all working and it's working together. And so what you'd have is an end result here, and the end result's good, and then you have processes that don't look as good, but they actually turn out good. And so what in actuality you have is all of it's good. God is causing all these things to work together for good. So I'm flying back from Uganda in March. I've been there doing some training for some pastors of Bible Institute, and I have a trip back. And I get to this trip, I get to the Uganda airport. I'm not counting the 5 hours driving to the airport because I got to take a shower and take a break, okay? So I'm not counting that, but from when I got to the airport, I got home 37 hours later. That was my trip. But when I got to the airport, it's okay, but it's a little odd, and I get up in line, and they're handwriting my boarding pass, and they're on a cell phone getting the details about it. Computers are down, electricity had been down, kind of a welcome to Uganda thing, as we say when we're over there. And I'm looking at this, and I go, not looking like a good trip right now. You ever do that? Kind of an omen. So I look at this, and I'm going to Brussels next. I don't know if they have computers there or not. You know, I'm guessing they do. This was a week before Brussels got bombed. So I've got all this in my head from this story, and I'm looking at this, and I go, what am I going to do? And I reached in God's kindness, what He taught me that I'm sharing today, and I pulled it out, and I concluded these important words. I want what happens. I'm going to take this trip, and I'm going to want what happens. And it lines me with God because I already know God's going to work it to good. And I know He can take anything, good, bad, and indifferent, and work it to good. So I'm going to take a posture throughout this whole trip where I, Fred Ray Lybrand, am going to want what happens. That means missed planes. That means confusion. That means baggage not coming. That means sitting by somebody whose hygiene isn't up to my Alabama standards. Could happen. I had the most incredible trip. It was amazing. I sat by like the head of hydrology and engineering at Notre Dame. They'd been there drilling wells in areas, teaching students about that. I met another guy who worked on Ebola research for the CDC. He bought me coffee. We had a great conversation. I love talking about engineering and Ebola and Jesus, well, everything. Because, you know what? I just kept saying, I want this. I want where I sat on the plane. I want this to happen. I got to Chicago, and I got kind of upgraded into I had a lounge access that I go rest, prop my feet up, eat some food. I mean, this not me trying to make it happen stuff was kind of cool. It's sitting there waiting for you right now. There are only two things I know of that get in our way in understanding this, because all you need to do is take a posture because God's sovereign and He's at work in everything and He's got the end result in the process, and you just learn to say, take a posture of, I want what happens. Can you say that right now? I want what happens. Try that. I want what happens. Can you look at a neighbor and say, I want what happens? And you know, if you believe in God and you understand His perspective, don't you want what happens? And don't you realize the peace that you miss out on in life is because you're sitting around having a hissy fit, pardon my French, That may be Slovakian, I'm not sure. But hissy fit about what's happening. So here's what's in the way. First, it's really simple. You could be fighting for control. You could be fighting what happens. And if you're fighting what happens, it means that you're in the place of God, i.e. not humble. If you ever wonder what humility is, here's humility. It's very simple. Humility is recognizing there's a God and you're not Him. That's humility. When we try to over-control and force everything going on, relationships, life, existence, etc., we're treating this world entirely mechanically, and we can run it. We're in charge. We are actually standing in the place of God, and you're not going to get peace because you cannot get everything under control. And if you hadn't learned that yet, try harder. You'll learn faster. And when you want what happens, you let God be God and you've got it figured out. He has the what and the how. Here's the other problem, though. Now, wait a minute, Fred. It sounds like you're saying I should want bad things to happen. And my answer would be, yeah, it upsets little children more than adults. But yeah, I do. I do sort of, not really. Let me explain it. It's called primary and secondary choice. And we do this in life. Look, there's something we want, right? Up here we want something, and that we want. And then there are other things you have to do to get it that we don't want. Did you ever go to college and you wanted to graduate, but you had classes you didn't want to take? Yeah, I wanted to graduate University of Alabama, English literature, fiction writing, communications. That's what I was studying. I wanted to graduate. I didn't want to take a foreign language. I thought English was bad enough, So I took Spanish. You know why I took Spanish? I took Spanish because I'm going back to Anniston, Alabama, practice law, and I'll never need Spanish there. So now I live in San Antonio. When you want one thing, there are things that are supported that you don't want. I wanted kids. Well, I wanted grandkids, but you apparently have to have kids to do this. Oh. So we wanted kids. I don't know that I wanted the diapers. Or, I didn't want all the complaining Jody did while she changed all the diapers, She was awesome. But there's a lot of stuff that goes on with kids that are not the fun stuff, but you want the family, the kids, the impact, the touch the world, the loving them, the connection, the hope of passing on something meaningful in the sin-sick world, right? You want that, and you want all the other stuff that comes with it, not because you want it and think it's great. I didn't want a Holocaust. I'd never want a Holocaust. But I can also look at Israel's in the land, and it wouldn't have happened without that. I'm not saying God did it. I'm not in that philosophical, theological question. I'm in this point. It doesn't matter what you throw out there. God can work it together for good. So take out that card, imaginary card. Some of you need to put on your imaginary reading glasses because I know how this goes. And look at that thing that you wrote down. And I want you to recognize that the way to peace right now for that is to want what happens. Yeah, it's crazy. It could be the bankruptcy. It could be an illness. One dear lady was sharing with me, she said, I wrote down OCD. I said, you didn't write it down neat enough. No, I didn't. I said, I didn't really. I said, I'm OCD too. My wife came up and I said, you ever see me a little OCD? And she rolled her eyes and all. Right now I want to pull my socks back up because they're slipping just a little bit and it drives me crazy. But I'm fine. So, whatever this thing is, it's a marriage relationship, it's a friendship that's gone awry. It's a struggle in learning something. It's a struggle in aging. It's a struggle in, you name it, whatever this thing that you don't have peace is, it is simply you gaining a perspective, for starters, that understand what God is up to, even though you don't know how He'll do it. And in that moment, you say, I want what happens, and everything changes. Closing illustration for you. Trying to encourage you to embrace one of what happens is a favorite story I ran across forever ago. About a man, a Chinese fella, the way I read it. It's probably a Sufi story for all I know. But he had a son and a horse, And one day, the son leaves the corral open, the horse runs to the hills. And lo and behold, all of his friends come and said, "Oh, what terrible, terrible luck you've had." And the man said, "How do you know this is terrible luck or good luck?" And sure enough, the next day, the horse comes back, a whole herd of stallions in the corral, son closes the gate, boom. The friends and neighbors come, "What great luck you've had." And he said, "How do you know if it's great luck or bad luck?" And sure enough, that's Alabama, sure enough, the son was breaking one of the stallions, was thrown and broke his leg severely in a couple of places, and all his friends and neighbors came and said, "What terrible luck you've had." He said, "How do you know if it's terrible luck or great luck?" Sure enough, a few days later, or a couple of weeks later, the army came through this town, this village, conscripted, as they say, all the young men into a war in which all of them died except this man's son who couldn't go. There's so much about to happen ahead in your life. And you miss out by not doing it peacefully because you're in a context, in the hands of the living God who's going to work it to good no matter what you throw at him. And he's up to something, and you can enjoy the ride or just fight like crazy. Don't fight. Don't fight. Lord, thank you for this moment, for the opportunity to consider truth together. The fact that you know already what's going to happen. Sure, we're burdened for our country, and we're burdened for our family and the hopes for our kids and all this future. But in all that burden, Lord, it's like we set aside faith. And in this moment, I would like to pick it back up and invite anyone in prayer to say, "Yes, Lord, I pick faith back up. I want what happens because you're the God who's going to make it all work. Teach me to rest in that." And Lord, as you do it and they experience it and I experience it, do it in a way that we say, except for God, it wouldn't have happened. So we truly can stop and give you the glory. Thank you for your peace. Amen.